Calories in versus calories out. Does it apply to you? Does it apply to the general population? Can it be used to help you to gauge your calories for weight maintenance, weight loss, fat loss? I talked about this in a previous video, and the short answer is yes, it can. Just as a recap to my last video, a lot of people will argue, or some people will argue, maybe not a lot of people, but some people will argue that calories in, calories out is not a good way to manage your weight or try to lose weight, because the body goes through various adaptations over time, and therefore the calories out becomes less and less and less. What's happening is the body becomes more efficient to a certain degree. It becomes more efficient with the calories out aspect. So yeah, this happens. I'm not denying that. It certainly does. I can't say with any degree of certainty if the people who say that calories in, calories out doesn't work, if they actually believe that you can't, it's futile to not control your food intake. I don't actually think that's what they're saying. But I feel like that is perhaps what some people might take from these videos that are put out, where they say that calories in, calories out doesn't work. So obviously it matters what you eat, and I think that I don't think too many people, if any at all, are going to argue with this. What do you do? How do you deal with these efficiencies? How much are these efficiencies going to play effect? How much are these efficiencies going to cause an effect, or at least a substantial effect? What about hormones? Because, I'm just talking about adaptations here. What about when, for example, a female is going through menopause? Is this going to have an effect? And then there's diseases. There's Hashimoto's, or, there's muscle wasting disease. There's all kinds of things that are going to affect the amount of calories that you're going to burn per day at rest. Everybody's going to be an individual, obviously, and there's going to be outliers for sure. But on a general level for the population, we can make good estimations on what your basal metabolic rate is just using simple, time-tested, scientific-backed equations. Right? Some of these equations are like the Harris-Benedict equation, or the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation, or the Katch-McArdle equation. Okay, and there's many others out there as well. These are sort of the top three. But they do a pretty good job of determining, within, a couple hundred calories, where your basal metabolic rate lies, and beyond that, determining, using an activity multiplier, determining what your calories ought to be based on the amount of exercise or physical activity that you're doing. Where do we go with this? Well, if you are somebody who is, again, having issues with managing their weight, not knowing where to turn in terms of losing weight, not really sure what to do long term, or if you're somebody who suffers from these sort of more extreme diets, my suggestion is to, really this goes for, I do this with all my clients, is to incorporate something like this. Try to determine one of these types of equations which can make a good estimation on your total calories out for the day. Use one of them, make an estimation on your calories, and then you can refine it based on what happens as you go through the days, well, I guess more specifically, or more accurately, the weeks through your diet, and then determine what's going to be your maintenance, or what really it takes to lose some weight. But you need to be patient with this, and I would suggest working with somebody. And it could be working with me, or it could be working with somebody else. But working with somebody who's done this a lot, okay? And because if you try to do this yourself, which you can, I'm not saying you can't, obviously, this is part of the reason I'm doing the video. You can do it yourself. It's just, you need to kind of not get too emotionally attached to what you're doing, and try to be as objective as possible when you're dealing with this. And that's the big problem, is people tend to get emotional when it comes to their own diet, and they don't see it in an objective light. And ultimately, usually where it leads them is to do something that is extreme in nature. So whether that's cutting out a whole category or several categories of food, or perhaps it's very, very low calories, or perhaps you're doing some sort of fad diet. The reality is you can keep pretty much all foods in your diet with the exception of the obvious. Okay, I mean, kind of want to stay away from junk food. Obviously here, we want to think about nutritional return. So typically we want to think more along the lines of real whole foods. But you can be eating things like, you can have bread in your diet. You can have dairy so long as you tolerate it well. In fact, I would encourage you to have dairy. You can be eating all kinds of meat, fruit, okay, all the basic stuff that is out there, but a lot of diets will often dismiss, or they won't include it because for whatever reason. You can have all these things and being reasonable with this and setting a reasonable amount of calories per day. So usually I don't recommend anything more than like max 15% deficit from your maintenance calories. All right, so the amount of calories it would take to sustain your weight over time. And yes, obviously it matters. In particular, what you eat, okay, the types of foods that you're eating, protein, carbs, carbohydrates, and fat. But from a very high level view, ultimately from the very, very top, we need to control calories. That's numero uno. And then from there, we can get more specific in terms of, macronutrients and specific foods. And number one, if this is something that you want to try to tackle yourself, I would suggest using something like the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation. It's pretty accurate. And like I said, you can just, follow those amount of calories that you're given. Usually assign yourself somewhere between 25 to 30% of those calories going towards protein. At least in the last video, I said 30% towards fat. At the very, very least, minimum 25% of calories going towards fat. Fat is important. It's a building block. It has many functions in the body. So, you want to include some of that. I don't really suggest doing a super low fat diet. And then the remaining calories are going to carbohydrates. Okay. Or you could do a low carbohydrate diet if you want. You could do more fat. You could do virtually, you could have 70% of your calories coming from fat if you wanted to. I don't really recommend that. Again, I like to think more about this as being sustainable. And if you want something to be sustainable, then you want to include all foods, or you want to include as many foods as you can, because that is what really the definition of sustainable is. The least restrictive something is, the more likely it is that you'll be able to follow it over the long term, because we want to think about long term. So that's where I would start. Okay, again, determine your maintenance calories, make a deficit from there, use one of these equations. One of these major equations that have been around for a long time, have a huge reservoir of people that were involved in it. They are quite accurate. Again, the Mifflin-St. Jeor is a great equation because it involves your age, and it involves, age, sex, height, and weight. So it's got a lot of the major factors that are going to have some bearing on your basal metabolic rate. And then assign an activity multiplier. You can look that up. It's pretty, it'll tell you, 1.65 times your BMR is, somebody who is, reasonably active through the week. And then assess from there, how are you responding to this? And I would give it at least a week to see what's happening with your body weight. And remember, when it comes to body weight, it's going to fluctuate day to day. So this is something that you want to take on a daily basis, same time every day, and then take the average for the week. And that would be your weight sort of for the week. Okay. But again, do it every day. Take it first thing in the morning upon waking. Just it'll be the most consistent then. And just know that you can, or you will, fluctuate in weight. It's inevitable. You will. Even if you've lost fat, even if you've lost, adipose tissue, even if you've lost, I don't really know how to say this without it sounding a bit confusing, but if you've actually lost weight, it doesn't necessarily show that you've lost weight, okay? In the short term, of course, right? Because you could lose, for example, you could lose a pound of fat in the week, but you could be up 2 pounds in water for the week for whatever reason. So weight is not the end all be all here. So you just need to track it over time. And obviously as time goes on, And if you're in a deficit, you're going to be losing some weight. The fluctuation that you're going to see in your weight is not going to, it's going to show, but it's not going to no pun intended, it's not going to outweigh the actual change in your weight because there's been enough weight loss, right? Okay, because your weight fluctuation is only going to be something like somewhere in the neighborhood of 2% or something, 3%. I think that's all I'm going to say in this video, but trying to give you guys some insight here as to how to go about this and where to start. And I'll do another video on this subject in the near future. Positive energy, positive vibes, believe in yourself, for the love of God, give some gratitude. And if you want to speak to me, reach out to me at fit10.com/contact. And let's chat.